The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the ICBA. Thank you for joining us for the .bank webinar. Are you ready? This webinar is a primer for banks interested in the .bank domain name extension. The slides for this webinar can be found and downloaded at www.encirca.com. This webinar will be recorded at the same URL, encirca.com/ICBA. You will be able to find the recording after the webinar. I'd like to introduce you to today's webinar presenters. Viveka Ware, ICBA Executive Vice President, responsible for regulatory policy for the ICBA. She is also board member of the FTLD Registry. We also have Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director. He's managing .bank and .insurance domain registries. He is also former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. Then we have John McElwain, Nelson Mullins Riley and Scarborough partner. He focuses on intellectual property litigation and strategy. He was voted one of the best lawyers in America from 2013 throughout 2015. He is also vice chair of the Internet Committee for the International Trademark Association. And finally, we have Thomas Barrett, Encirca. He's the president. The first .bank accredited registrar, founded in 2001. Encirca is the sole registrar serving on FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. Encirca is also trademark agent for the Trademark Clearinghouse. So this will be our agenda for today. We'll start off with an introduction to new GTLDs. We'll move on to .bank policies, then trademark protection, and then finally registration process and costs for .bank. Throughout the webinar, if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the bottom right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar widget. All questions will be held until the end of the webinar. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Viveka on introduction to new GTLDs. Viveka?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today. The Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, commonly known as ICANN, decided to expand the generic top-level domains, the letters in the Internet domain name, immediately after the dot from the previous level to hundreds and possibly thousands once the expansion is complete. ICANN is a not-for-profit organization that coordinates how unique Internet addresses are assigned worldwide. And I do indicate, I use the verb coordinates, but really they're also the regulator. ICANN requires that all new generic top-level domains offer a sunrise period, which is just on the horizon, during which trademark holders may pre-register names that are the same or similar to their trademarks in order to avoid cyber squatting. A bank must have a trademark granted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to participate in the sunrise period. This period occurs prior to the general launch of the new generic top-level domain. So registrars must be accredited by ICANN and approved by the operator of .bank and .insurance, FTLD Registry Services, LLC. Encirca is one of those approved registrars, and there are others. .bank generic top-level domain will launch very shortly with the sunrise period. Please be on the lookout for the .insurance generic top-level domain launch in the fall of this year. Community banks with insurance agencies will be interested in the .insurance domain. Now, how is .bank different? .bank is owned and operated by the financial services community, which includes a coalition of banks, insurance companies, and financial services trade associations from around the world. Only verified members of the global banking community are eligible to register domains. For banks, it includes charter verification with the registrant's regulator. Domains must correspond to legal names. For example, ABC Bank would not be able to register XYZ Bank. This eliminates cyber squatting. .bank is a trusted, verified, and more secure and easily identifiable space on the internet for the global banking community and its customers. Now, the benefits of .bank. .bank is designed to be a trusted, protected, and more secure online location. As I mentioned earlier, each applicant will be verified as legitimate members of the banking industry before being permitted to register for .bank. .bank establishes a solid foundation on which a bank can securely communicate with customers, stakeholders, and regulators. The security bar is much higher for financial institutions than other companies conducting business over the internet, given your roles as trusted financial intermediaries for your customers. .bank is poised to be the recognized online platform for growth and innovation in the banking sector. ICBA's role in .bank. ICBA applauds the formation of FTLD Registry, the registry operator for .bank and .insurance, and we're pleased to be a founder, investor, and endorser of FTLD Registry. We believe it is critical to protect and serve the financial services community by creating a secure financial services channel on the internet. Additionally, we believe it is in the best interest of the financial services community to own, operate, and govern its own top-level domains. We are very pleased to be working with Encirca to help community banks understand and register for the soon-to-be-launched .bank domain. As part of this agreement, community banks will be able to access a unique website with information and resources about securing and activating .bank domain names. ICBA and ICBA are hosting frequent webinars allowing community banks to learn more about the eligibility for a .bank domain, the registration process, and implementation tips. Additionally, ICBA members will be able to take advantage of preferred pricing for .bank registration. And now I'll turn the program over to Craig.
Thank you, Viveka, and thanks to Encirca for hosting another webinar about the introduction of the .bank TLD. Okay, move on to the next slide. So Viveka's already given you a little bit of background about FTLD Registry Services, a company that owns, operates, and governs the .bank and .insurance top-level domains. As Viveka also noted, we are here to serve and protect the sector and to offer it a new and more secure place online, certainly easily more identifiable with the .bank appended to your name. We were founded in 2011 by a host of banks, insurance companies, and trade associations, including the Independent Community Bankers of America. And we do have a number of mechanisms that feed into the governance structure of our company, including an advisory council, which weighs in on policies and procedures, board of directors, and Viveka is one of those board members that ultimately approves the direction of this company. And we've also got a security requirements working group that initially met in 2011, it met again in 2014, and it's responsible for development of the security requirements that will be implemented in .bank and .insurance. Our key technology partners are VeriSign, who runs the infrastructure of the .bank domain registry, Semantic, that is responsible for conducting the verifications of all of the entities seeking domains in .bank, and Tom will talk about Semantic's verification a bit later in a little more detail. And then, of course, we have select ICANN registrars, and that is the entities such as Encirca that are authorized by FTLD to distribute our domain names. Next slide, please. So we have very strict eligibility in .bank, and as you can see, it is restricted primarily to regulated banking institutions. We also do enable banking associations and government regulators to participate if they so choose. And then you can also see we've got industry service providers who may be more commonly known to you as a core processor or a technology service provider. We came to learn very early on in the process of our evolution with our .bank application and talking to stakeholders that these core processors, because of the critical role that they play in a .bank's online presence, we understood that it makes, and we understand that it makes sense to involve them in .bank if they so choose to participate. We do, at the end of the day, expect that the very large majority of registrations made in .bank will be made by banking institutions. Next slide, please. So bank has enhanced security, and here are a few examples of what is required by you as a bank for participating in .bank. We do have mandatory verification and re-verification of eligibility, which will happen when you make your initial registration and then subsequently at either your time of renewal or every 2 years, whichever comes sooner. We will also be monitoring for ongoing eligibility for banks and for those that fall out of eligibility over time for a variety of purposes such as acquisition or merger or liquidation. Those domain names would then be ineligible for the use in .bank. DNSSEC, which is a technology, a cryptographic technology that essentially ensures that internet users that are trying to get to your bank's website are actually getting to the place they intended versus being redirected or misdirected to some other location. Email authentication is intended to mitigate spoofing and phishing and other bad activities that sometimes happen to internet users when they're accessing email. The way authenticated email works could be a couple of different ways, and that is you will set a policy for your registry, and the details of how email authentication works will either be handled by your internal IT department, it could be your core processor, it could be even your registrar. They will work with you to help define your email authentication policy and thereby enabling email service providers such as Google and Yahoo and Microsoft to follow the rules that you set and prevent bad emails or phished emails from getting to your customers. Strong encryption is intended to protect the security of your communications over the internet, both to your customers and or to your other service providers or vendors. Multi-factor authentication is a tool that will be implemented by your registrar, and it could be Encirca if you choose to work with them. And it is a process whereby you need to possess both your username and your password, but also an additional piece of identifying information, such as some type of code that could be issued by email or SMS message. The purpose of this multi-factor authentication process is to make sure that no one other than yourself or an authorized user from your bank changes your registration data. We do have a prohibition against proxy and privacy registration services. What these types of services do is effectively shield the name, the true owner's name of a particular domain with the service provider's information, and we created this prohibition largely in response to requests that we had from law enforcement about the troubles that they have tracking down bad actors or bad people when registration data is hidden behind a proxy registration service. So we have eliminated that obstacle for particular for law enforcement. And then the requirement to use .bank name servers is also something that Tom will get into in a little bit more detail, but it is a requirement that is necessary to ensure that all of the security requirements associated with your use of your .bank domain are abided by. Next slide, please. So we also, in addition to having a registrant eligibility policy, we also have a naming selection policy that defines the types of names you can have and in what period you may have them. Viveka gave an example in the opening session or her opening remarks that ABC Bank couldn't, for example, apply for XYZ Bank because it doesn't have a right to have that domain name. And having strict naming selection policies is intended to eliminate or substantially reduce the cyber squatting and similar types of activities that happen in other GTLDs. We have a requirement that your domain name must correspond to your trade name, your trademark, or your service name. And that is the rule that's applied during the general availability period starting on June 24th. During the sunrise phase, and John McElwain will get into this detail a little bit during his session. During the sunrise phase, which starts this Sunday, May 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the requirement is that the domain name must be an exact match of a mark that you have registered in ICANN's Trademark Clearinghouse. So the rules for general availability for name selection are slightly more relaxed. We also have a requirement that the domain name must not be a reserved name, and that could be either a reserved name that we as FTLD have identified or one of those that are mandated by ICANN. And the list of all the reserved names are both available on FTLD's website, and they're also available on Encirca's website. There are some rules around what characters can be used in domain names. I think most are probably pretty familiar with the fact that they have to be an alphanumeric character or a number. And the one special character that is allowed is a hyphen. You can't, for example, have a domain name with an ampersand or an exclamation point or anything like that. 1- and 2-letter names are currently prohibited, either by FTLD registry or by ICANN. There may be a time when 2-letter domains will be available. If that should happen, we would make an announcement on our website and through our registrars, and then they could then pass on that information to you in the event having such a name is something that is of interest to you. The last bullet here, common community names, generics, and geographic names are reserved. Again, some are reserved by FTLD, some are reserved by ICANN. These examples here, Citizens, Community, National, are some of FTLD's reserved common community names, and all it means is you can't register that exact name appended with the word .bank. So you couldn't register citizens.bank. However, you can, in accordance with our name selection policy, be creative. So if you're the Citizens Bank of Mississippi, perhaps you want citizensms.bank or citizensbankms.bank. It could even be cbms.bank. So again, a lot of flexibility with the names that you choose during the general availability period. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of the corresponding rule for names registered during general availability, and I've already gone through a couple of examples. This is provided to give you additional guidance on how you might structure a domain name. It's certainly not our intent to withhold domain names that you might rightly be entitled to. So if you do have a question about domain name availability, you can check with your registrar. If that happens to be Encirca, Tom and his team can certainly answer those questions You can also contact us at FTLD Registry Services. Next slide, please. And I guess I turn the session now over to John McElwain.
Okay, thanks, Craig, and thanks to ICBA and INCIRCA for organizing all of this. I'm going to speak to everyone today on the topic of trademark protection, in particular, trademark protection in the domain name system. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Trademark protection is going to be important for 3 reasons. First, it allows for registration in the Trademark Clearinghouse. Second, it is going to provide for sunrise registrations in the various launch processes of new GTLDs. And third, it's going to allow a bank to protect its mark from having others use confusingly similar marks in a domain name or online. In particular, I'm going to cover the intersection of trademarks with the .bank launch, which is primarily going to impact the timing of a bank's ability to register a .bank domain name. But before I get into that, let me cover some of the terminology that we see here on this slide. The abbreviation TMCH means the Trademark Clearinghouse. The Trademark Clearinghouse is the entity authorized by ICANN to serve as a repository of trademark registration data that is used to have 2 services, first a sunrise and second a trademark claims. So the sunrise period is an early registration period open to only holders of trademark registrations that have recorded those trademark registrations with the Trademark Clearinghouse. As you can see here, the .bank sunrise period is going to start at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th. At that time, if you wanted to take part in the sunrise, you must have what is called an SMD file, or a signed mark data file. The general availability, which is sometimes referred to as the land rush period, is going to begin for .bank on 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. Again, for .bank, this is a period that anybody meeting the eligibility requirements can register a .bank domain name. Let's go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, sunrise, the ability to take advantage of the sunrise requires that a bank have its trademark recorded in the Trademark Clearinghouse. When that occurs, a signed mark data file will be provided to you as a trademark holder. There is still time to register your trademarks with the Trademark Clearinghouse. However, please be aware that it takes about a week to process those applications, and additional fees do apply. Since the sunrise period within .bank is on a first-come, first-served basis, we encourage, if you have not done so yet, to record your registered trademarks with the Trademark Clearinghouse. You would still then have time to take advantage of the sunrise process. Another thing to keep in mind is that verification still must be passed, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. But just having a Trademark Clearinghouse registration is not going to guarantee that you get your .bank domain name. Also, as Craig covered, the corresponding rule does not apply during sunrise. So all those abilities to use initials and to span the dot, that does not apply in the sunrise. Your .bank domain name must be an exact spelling or exact match to the trademark registration that you've recorded with the Trademark Clearinghouse. That is not a policy that .bank has. That is a requirement of all sunrise domain name registrations that ICANN has put forth with respect to this entire program. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, when should a bank register in the sunrise period? That would be if you already have a federal trademark registration, you want to take advantage of the Trademark Clearinghouse, and you want a .bank domain name that is an exact match of your trademark. So sometimes your trademark, for instance, might have bank at the end, and you don't want to have xyzbank.bank. If that is in fact the case, you're going to have to wait until the general availability period to span that dot, as Craig explained. So, leading into that, when to register in the general availability. When you don't have a federal trademark registration, and many community banks are not going to have one, or when you want a .bank domain name that is not an exact match of the trademark that you have. So this would be, again, using the corresponding acronyms, abbreviations, adding geography, adding towns, cities, states to your bank name. Any of those, you're going to have to wait until general availability. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, John. At this time, I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be available on encirca.com/ICBA. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them into the question box on the lower right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar widget. And now on registration process and costs, Tom Barrett.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to John, Craig, and Viveka, and thank you to all the ICBA members for joining us today. I'm going to talk about the mechanics of registering a .bank domain name, getting it verified, and activating it. This process is pretty much the same with any registrar you might want to work with. And so, starting Sunday night for Sunrise, and for trademark owners, and starting in June for everyone else, there's a real-time registration process that consists of the following steps. You go to a registrar, you put in the domain name you want for .bank. The registrar in real time will check to see if your name is available, and it will make sure that no one else has registered yet, and it'll make sure it's not already reserved by the registry. If it's available, then the registrar will accept your payment and submit that name for your reservation. And it goes into a pending create status until you complete the verification process. So after it's been reserved, Symantec, the verification agent, will conduct their verification. Once they complete the process, and assuming you're approved, the domain is then released from that pending status and registered. It's important to note that the name is not necessarily activated yet. That requires you to provide DNS name servers. And in fact, it is not required that you activate your .bank domain name right away. And so you have plenty of time to plan carefully with your internal departments and vendors and decide when you want to activate that .bank domain name. And of course, you continue to run your existing .com website in parallel for as long as you want. So let's talk about the verification process. Assuming you've found a name that's available, you've been able to successfully reserve that through a registrar. The registrar will also provide all of your credentials to Symantec to do the verification process. So all that has to be collected when you apply for the name. Symantec will do a background check on the bank, make sure that in fact they are a licensed or chartered bank. If they're not a bank and say they're a technology service provider or core processor, that's more of a manual process and might take a few days to be completed. But for banks, the process is expected to be happen within 24 to 48 hours. Symantec will verify the bank is valid. They'll verify the domain name corresponds to a name the bank currently has rights to. And they'll verify, for example, that all the phone number or postal address corresponds to what it should be for the bank. They also will verify that the person who submitted the application on behalf of that bank and whose details were provided is a full-time employee of the bank and, in fact, is authorized to submit those names on behalf of the bank. And so they will typically contact the HR department at the bank to confirm this. If you don't have an HR department, they'll want to contact the suitable executive within the bank who can do that confirmation. and that process will be repeated every 2 years by Symantec. So once you have completed your registration and your verification, let's talk about how you activate your .bank domain name. As I said earlier, you do not need to activate it right away. There is a requirement, however, that your .bank domain name uses .bank DNS name servers. And a name server typically has the format of ns1.encirca.net, for example, if you were using Encirca's name servers. And so if you have a .com domain name today, and perhaps you're using Network Solutions or GoDaddy, then they might be providing name servers for you to host your domain name. That would not be allowed with .bank. You need to use name servers that end in .bank. And our recommendation for our .bank customers is that we will use your existing .bank domain name that you just registered, and we will create name servers based on that domain name. And that allows you to activate that without involving any other third party. So again, these name servers are independent from the name servers you might be using for your current website. So let's talk about how Encirca, what special services Encirca will provide to its customers. I described what happens in real time to register your domain name. As it turns out, there are a lot of banks with common names. They have a lot of questions about whether or not they have a trademark or not, whether or not they should apply during sunrise or wait until general availability. And so Encirca is offering a free pre-screening process where banks can go through a process, understand what names they're eligible for, and most importantly, understand whether or not the names they want are available. We have many banks who are asking for 1, 2, 3 letter strings. As Craig said earlier, the 1 and 2 letter strings are reserved. The 3-letter strings are available, but highly competitive. And so, for example, we can help you understand if we think it's going to be competitive and how to ensure that you're first in line basically to get that name. One of the things you'll find on our website today, and I think we're the only registrar that does this, is you can put in the names you're interested in, and we will check for you in real time and let you know if those are reserved or not. So it saves you a lot of time from going through the application process, only to find out later that you applied for a name that you are not eligible for. The other important service that we are providing is that by going through the pre-screening process, we will submit your order for you into a queue or line, so to speak, and we'll automatically submit that order for you when the registry opens for business for either May 18th, which is for sunrise, or late June for general availability. So once you complete the pre-screening process and pay, there's nothing else you need to do to make sure your order gets submitted. We're also offering some optional service. One we call a fallback service, the other one called a premium DNS service. Next slide, please. So the idea behind pricing is that, I'll describe those services in a second, but we are charging $999 a year. This includes the free pre-screening service, and so you can go through that process under no obligation to pay us if you want to proceed. It includes both the verification and registration fees for 1 year. All ICBA members are receiving a 10% discount off of that price, and we're displaying the discount coupon on the screen here. And based on our research, this is the best pricing you will find anywhere in the industry. And most importantly, you're not required to pay up front. We will accept any sort of payment method that you prefer, from credit card to bank check to ACH, etc. And as long as we receive payment prior to the submission date, we will submit your order for you. Refunds will be provided if for some reason a bank somewhere else in the world applies and is successful for a particular domain name, minus a processing fee. Next slide, please. So I promised I would talk a little bit about some of these optional services. We do have banks who are applying for multiple domain names, and it makes sense. They get their full name. They might drop the word bank. They might do an acronym. They might do a marketing slogan. But they also have banks that says, well, there are certain names I want only if I don't get my first choice. And so can I have a conditional order? And so we call that the fallback service. And it's for banks who want to have an alternative name that we apply for only and only if their first choice is not available. And again, this type of service only makes sense for the first day of general availability, called the land rush, because clearly after that point, in real time, we'll be able to tell you if your first choice is available or not. We are also offering an optional premium DNS service because we recognize that your current registrar or DNS host might not be prepared to support .bank. With this service, you get vanity name servers using your own .bank domain name. It supports all the mandatory security standards such as DNSSEC and DMARC. It will include instant web forwarding, so you can activate your .bank domain name and point it to your current website. And we'll be launching this shortly this month with a discount for ICBA members. So what can you do now to maximize your success? Well, as I mentioned, you can come to our website today and find out if the names you're interested are on the reserved names list. And I believe we're the only registrar that offers that searching capability today. You then can initiate the pre-screening process. You can pay now if you want, or you can pay later. It's totally up to you. But by starting that process, you can ensure that your names that you want, you're eligible for, and we can submit those for you on your behalf when the registry opens for business. We also can help you answer questions such as, do you have a trademark? Yes or no? Are there other trademarks in the Trademark Clearinghouse that match your bank name and might be applying during the sunrise period? And do you want any sort of alternative or fallback names? That should be included as well. So on the final slide, would be interested in any questions you might want to ask. If you want to start that pre-screening process, please go to encirca.com/ICBA, and then we can schedule a free consultation with you to answer any questions you might have. If you have any trademark questions, you can also contact John McElwain directly at john.mcElwain@nelsonmullins.com. Thank you very much for your attention today, and I'll turn this over to Andrew to see what questions have been asked.
Thank you, Tom. We have a few questions today. We'll start off with questions relative to the Trademark Clearinghouse. It was mentioned earlier that it takes months to receive a registered trademark in the USPTO. And then later on it was mentioned that the Trademark Clearinghouse typically takes a week to validate a trademark. Could you help clarify the difference between receiving a registered trademark and receiving a validated trademark through the Trademark Clearinghouse?
Sure. This is John. I can probably take that. So to be able to have a trademark recorded in the Trademark Clearinghouse, you need to first apply or have a trademark registration issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So that is where you go to register a trademark in the United States. The Trademark Clearinghouse is an independent entity authorized by ICANN to be a repository of information of trademark registrations, not only from the U.S. but from all over the world. So the time period to get a U.S. trademark registration is about a year, maybe a little longer. The time period to take that registration and record it with the Trademark Clearinghouse is about a week.
Okay, thank you, John. And now, as a follow-up regarding banks that do not have a registered trademark, how would they go about applying for their .bank domain name?
If a bank does not have a registered trademark or have one that's going to issue in the next few weeks, that bank is going to have to wait for the general availability period to launch.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question, I believe this is for you, Craig. We have a bank that is a single letter. They would like to register a single letter .bank. They're under the impression that this is not possible. Could they then be allowed to add a prefix or a suffix to the single letter?
Thanks, Andrew, for the question. So, correct, that currently single letter domain names are not available, and adding a prefix or a suffix would appear to comply with the corresponding rule policy.
Great, thank you. And I believe you also mentioned that it could be possible that single letter .bank names may be released. Could you help clarify on that as well, please?
Well, with all of the reserved names, there is a possibility that we may choose to make them available at some point in the future, and it could be that we might issue an RFP for such domains. It could be that they're just allocated first come, first serve at some point in the future, but any type of process that might be developed for the allocation of current words that are reserved would be publicized on our website and also publicized to all of our registrars so they could then inform customers about the availability of these types of domains.
Great, thank you, Craig. Now, regarding banks that have .com domains, under the name corresponding guidelines, is it possible that even though you own a .com URL, another bank could take a match of your .com URL in .bank?
Yes. Yeah, this is Tom Barrett from Encirca. That's absolutely correct. So the fact you have a .com domain name does not give you any priority over the corresponding .bank domain name. And the reason for that is that you need to remember that there are now 600 different extensions on the internet. Every country has their own extension. So it's certainly possible that there could be many banks anywhere in the world that have the same sort of domain name that you have. They just don't have a .com. It's also important to remember under the corresponding rule that there could be another bank with a different .com domain name that in fact is also eligible to apply for your .com domain name even though they're different strings because of the way the corresponding rule works. So you could have competition from banks both in the U.S. as well as outside the U.S.
Should banks that plan on buying a .bank domain name, should they also keep their .com domain name?
This is Tom Barrett again. We certainly would suggest you hang on to your .com domain name and go through the deliberate process of understanding how you want to activate your .bank domain name. There will be a migration guide coming out. I know Craig is working on one at ftld.com, and that will help you understand, for example, from a technical level, as well as from a marketing level and a legal level, all the different things that you should be thinking about as you look to migrate your website from, say, .com to .bank.
Thank you, Tom. In regards to the technical advanced security, how will spoofing be protected? Can we go into further detail on this?
Sure, Andrew. Thanks for the question. So, in the context of the email authentication piece, part of the way that activities like spoofing and phishing and others are propagated is that someone is masquerading as an authorized user of your domain name and using it for email purposes. And the email authentication requirements, that is the DMARC, the SPM, the SPF, and DKIM records, are all intended to mitigate that by making it very difficult for an email service provider to deliver an email, whether it's phished or spoofed from an organization other than the legitimate organization.
Great, thank you. And moving on to DNSSEC or DNSSEC. Who is supporting this for .bank, and are many hosting companies planning to support this for .bank?
Thanks, Andrew. So DNSSEC could be supported by a variety of service providers. It could be your hosting company, it could be your core processor, it could be your registrar, such as Encirca, and it could be your DNS service provider. So it really depends on who you use to operate your infrastructure. And we have, as FTLD, that is, has had many conversations with core processors and certainly registrars around the DNSSEC requirement. And an organization's ability to support it, they may have that current capability. It may be something that they're working on. So what you need to do is make sure you have a conversation soon with your service providers around their ability to support it. Because if they're not ready to support it now and you'd like to use your .bank domain soon, you may need to consider augmenting your vendors with a provider that can be helpful in that area.
Great, thank you, Craig. You mentioned core processors. Are they eligible for a .bank domain name?
So many of the core processors will be eligible because of the unique place and position that they play in terms of operating a bank's either online banking or bill paying services or operating their websites. The core processor does need to, we need to apply for a domain name just like any other bank or eligible entity and go through the approval process. Core processors also have to be approved by FTLD's board of directors. So it's not that any core processor is automatically admitted. There's still a review, a verification, and an approval process that needs to happen. For the banking sector that is used to working with core processors that are supervised at some level by the FFIEC, those are the types of core processors that we envision being part of .bank. It really depends on how you define what a core processor is, and we obviously have to handle those on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you. Regarding high-level .bank questions, do we have an estimate about what percentage of banks we anticipate will be participating in .bank?
I wish that I had a big crystal ball that could tell me that answer because it would make my life a lot easier. But we don't have an estimate on how many are going to be using it. If the level of interest and the number of questions that we've been getting is any indication of how and when it'll be used, it seems like it's a high priority item for a lot of banks. So we're looking forward to them adopting and rolling out their .bank domains.
Great, thank you. And I can most certainly agree to that as well. Does .bank apply to email only, or will it also be used as a web URL?
So it's really up to the individual bank on what they use their .bank domain for. It could be their online consumer-facing presence. It could be just a method by which they communicate to customers or vendors or their regulators. So the use cases will vary from institution to institution, and ultimately it's up to the individual bank to determine what that is.
Thank you, Craig. Now, I believe this next question would be for John or Tom. If a bank does have a registered trademark, can we give us a quick summary on what their next steps would be to get their trademark in .bank?
This is John. I'll let Tom chime in if I miss anything. But the first step is to apply for to record that trademark with the Trademark Clearinghouse if you want to take advantage of a Sunrise registration. I know that you can do that through the INCIRCA website, where it's part of the process on the .bank form. There's other companies that do that as well, or a bank can apply themselves through the Trademark Clearinghouse. At that point, again, you have about a week-long wait, maybe a little less, to get that approved and receive a signed mark data file, in which case then that can be provided to a registrar like INCIRCA, and you can file in the Sunrise. If not, you don't want to take advantage of the Sunrise, then you would just need to wait to general availability. And as I kind of mentioned in my introduction, the only real impact that your trademark would have in that case is if there was a case of cyber squatting going on, which is going to be very unlikely in the .bank field.
And I'll chime in to add to that, John. There are two questions I would ask a bank who are interested in doing this process. One is, does the registered trademark that you have today, does that match the domain name you want to apply for? Because again, during Sunrise, it needs to be a match. You can't use the corresponding rules. Number two, I would want to know what that name is so that I could tell you whether or not there is another bank who is already in the Trademark Clearinghouse. And the reason you want to know that is that means you want to be able to apply for Sunrise as soon as you possibly can. So I had a conversation yesterday with a bank. I won't tell you who it is, but they said, we're in the Clearinghouse. Can you tell us if there's any other banks in the Clearinghouse with the same name? And I was able to do that check on the phone with him, and sure enough, there is another bank located somewhere else in the country with the exact same trademark. Both banks are in the Trademark Clearinghouse today, and so I said, well, gee, you may have competition starting Sunday night at 8 p.m. We want to make sure that we get your name towards the top of our queue because of that. There are 3 documents you need to provide us. As you've heard, we are also a trademark agent to the Clearinghouse. In order to start the process, we need 3 documents. We need a copy of your registered trademark. So if you go to the USPTO, for example, and display your trademark record and print that out, that is sufficient. 2, we need a signed declaration of use, and there's a template for that you can find on our website. You just need to sign that exactly and make sure the way you sign it as owner of the trademark is an exact match of what is shown on your trademark record. And then 3rd, we need a proof of use specimen, which proves that in fact you're using that trademark in commerce. A screenshot of your website, a screenshot or scanned image of your marketing flyer, or something like that would demonstrate that proof of use. So those 3 documents are required. Again, we're handling trademark submissions this week for banks who want to make sure they get submitted Sunday night.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on to general availability. Do you recommend that banks wait until June 23rd? I know you mentioned want to submit people right away because it's first come, first serve. What would be the high-level steps to getting in the queue for that?
So as this is Tom Barrett again, I can tell you how INCIRCA is working, and I assume it's working the same way at some of the other registrars. But we already have 2 lines that are forming for .bank. We have a line for Sunrise, and we have a line for general availability. And so we're going to submit orders mostly based on the time that they are received unless we think that they're going to be in competition because of, say, multiple trademarks in the clearinghouse. So the sooner you get through the pre-screening process and added to a submission queue, the better the chances are that you will get your first choice domain name.
Great, thank you. Circling back to the clearinghouse, besides .bank Sunrise registrations, does the Trademark Clearinghouse offer any benefits?
This is John. I guess I'll take that. So the Trademark Clearinghouse offers two benefits. First is the ability to take part in any Sunrise process. As we've all may be aware, and Viveka covered it, there's approximately 1,400 or about 800, I believe, generic top-level domains coming out, so you could theoretically take part in one of those other top-level domain name extensions. It also provides a trademark claims notice, so a bank would get notice if anybody registered an exact match to their trademark in any of those top-level domain spaces. Those are the two benefits.
Great, thank you. Quick question for Tom. Where is Encirca located?
We are in Boston, Massachusetts. We had the, if you know Boston, we had the heaviest snowfall ever this past winter, but right now I'm looking at a beautiful May day. Trying to make up its mind if it's spring or summer here, but right just north of Boston.
Thank you. I believe this is the final question. Running a .bank and .com in parallel, will there be no issues with the way the website works, especially if their core processor does not have a .bank domain name? Will the security features be diminished?
So I'll say something, Craig, you can chime in on the security piece, but in terms of, there's absolutely no impact for running both websites or domain names in parallel. And in fact, your first move might be to activate the .bank domain name. Of course, it will have DNSSEC and DMARC records as part of that activation, but then you are able to redirect it to your existing website without impacting your current operations.
Yeah, I would echo Tom's sentiments. If there's a more specific question, I'll do my best to answer it.
Yeah, I think the more specific piece to that is obviously if you're redirecting it, your .bank name to your .com website, you are dependent on the security measures that you already have in place for your .com domain name, and so it's not necessarily a full-blown .bank website if you're simply doing a redirect.
Right. We would envision that redirects more often than not would be from your com name to your bank name, not the reverse.
Okay, thank you, both Tom and Craig. As this is the last question. How would someone go about receiving a free consultation with Encirca?
All right, that's a slam dunk, as we say. On your screen, you can see the email address for scheduling the free consultation. We're implementing a new process this week where we will, in your email, suggest some available times, and we are trying to schedule all requests because we are getting inundated with calls about .bank, and we're trying to make sure we manage that process. We certainly would recommend you go through the pre-screening process first at encirca.com/ICBA. That allows you to tell us make sure the names you want are not reserved, and we get all your basic contact information captured, and then we would follow up with that consultation. Again, you do not have to pay for that process up front. You can simply, the checkout process, select a pay later option, and we can take care of billing later.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Craig, John, Viveka, and members of the Independent Community Bankers of America. I'd like to remind you that this webinar has been recorded. You can find it online at encirca.com/ICBA. As Tom just mentioned, to schedule a free consultation with Encirca, please email icba@encirca.com. If you have any further trademark questions, please contact your trademark counsel or john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com. I'd like to thank you all for attending today. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.